inkling of my very first question. So, why transfer now after only a few months of being presiding justice of the Sandigang Bayan?
Your Honor, good morning. As they say, we all have dreams. And my dream was to become a deputy ombudsman for the Visayas. I'm just trying to overshoot this time.
So, having been with the Sandigang Bayan, no, as an associate justice and as presiding justice, no, what do you think are your distinct advantages over the other applicants?
As we all know, Your Honor, the Sandigan Bayan's prosecutors come from the Office of the Ombudsman. Day in and day out, we cater to cases that are filed by the Ombudsman, prosecuted by the Office of the Ombudsman. And because of that, we are quite familiar with the processes of the Office of the Ombudsman and what they do. And because of this familiarity of their processes, their proceedings as well, I thought it best for me to offer myself to this position.
So you must have seen how, of course, no, you have seen how cases are prosecuted, the system in the ombudsman. So should you be the ombudsman, what innovations will you introduce to the office?
First and foremost, and I think it should be what is primary, no, is really the digitization of the processes of the ombudsman. We have to remove in the ombudsman that personal touch or that personal intervention in the processes, so that if we digitize, we would know that there are specific periods that each of the investigator and other officials that must do within a specific time frame. We would also be able to distinguish which of the cases should have been filed earlier and avoid that principle of inordinate delay to apply. As we all know, there are several cases that were pending before the Sandigan Bayan, but said cases were dismissed because of the application of the principle of inordinate delay.
You read my mind again. That was my final question about the inordinate delay, and you just answered it. Thank you and good luck,
Thank you
PJ
po.
Ekong.
Thank you, Attorney Mejia. Our next interviewer is the Honorable Justice Erlinda Pinera Uy.
Thank you, Attorney Cuevas. My classmate also. I'm adapting his questions. Most of my questions were already asked. Anyway,
Thank you
just a
po.
few questions.
Yes po,
Um,
Justice.
Yes. Based on your experience in deciding graft and corruption cases, what recurring weaknesses, if any, have you observed in ombudsman investigations and prosecutions that you would seek to correct or improve if appointed?
Your Honor, I have seen that in several cases, there is a difficulty of the prosecution to produce the witnesses. And if ever the witnesses are presented, they now have that fuzzy understanding or recall of what happened. It's because of the gap between the activity or the incident that happened and the actual trial that is held before the Sandigan Bayan. Because of that lapse of time, there is now uncertainty in the mind of the witness of the prosecution, and that is where our defense counsels would want to punch on the witnesses. Now, that is if the witnesses come at all. Some of them are dead when the case is already brought before the Sandigan Bayan, or that some have retired and could no longer be found. Crucial to the cases before the Sandigan Bayan are the witnesses coming from COA, no, and the other government agencies. But most often when we call them, some have already retired. those from the different agencies have retired and are sick and could no longer even recall what happened to the case that is pending before the court. So it is important that when a case is filed, right away, the proceeding before the courts, not just in the Sandigan Bayan, but the proceedings before the courts should start so that the witnesses will still have a fresh memory of the incident that is being tried before the court.
You mentioned about the gap between activity and incident. Would this not be more a concern of the Sandigan Bayan than the Ombudsman? Because it's the court that sets the calendar, the schedule?
It's to me po, Your Honor, the problem is not in the setting of the case, but when the case is filed before us, the gap between the incident and the date of filing of the information is like 10 years, 12 years, 15 years. It's too long a time. And that's why some of the cases get dismissed for inordinate delay.
So in the specific case you mentioned of the inordinate delay circumstances, how would you address case backlogs and ensure timely investigations without compromising due process if appointed?
Again, I think digitization is one of the keys to determine and ensure that the period set by the rules of the ombudsman, the former ombudsman amended their administrative order, no, of processing criminal and administrative cases, and he has already set timelines. So there's a period, 10 days, 15 days. It's a matter of strictly enforcing and observing this period so that when the cases are filed, we still have witnesses who are present, witnesses who are alive, and still testify on the incident or event that has occurred.
So if appointed, how much importance will you give to witness protection?
We would strengthen the matter of witness protection. As of now, in the case of the Ombudsman, they do not have the witness protection program similar to that of the DOJ. What they have is the grant of immunity status to some of their witnesses. So if I will be appointed as Ombudsman, the witness protection program should also be strengthened, if not akin to the witness protection program of the DOJ.
How do you define moral courage in public office? And can you cite an instance in your career when you had to make an unpopular but principled decision?
Moral courage, I think, to me, means that you are able to stand by what you think is right and defend that even if your thought is not popular. Even if your decision is not popular, you have to abide by that because you believe that that is right. I have made several unpopular decisions as a justice, and I still stand by my decisions even though they are unpopular because I believe that the decisions that I wrote are really backed not just by the facts, but also by law. Thank you po.
So that was my last question. Good luck to you, PJ Eco.
Thank you po, Justice.
Thank you, Justice Uy. Our next interviewer is the Honorable Congresswoman Jerville R. Luistro.
Good morning, PJ.
Good morning po, Congressman.
PJ, I understand you're still young. You are 58 and therefore have 12 years remaining before the mandatory retirement age of 50. Why did you decide to apply for the position of Ombudsman, considering that the post carries a fixed term of 7 years? If appointed, would you still pursue government service upon the expiration of your term as Ombudsman?
Okay. First, as I said, I decided to apply because it has been my dream, even when I was still first year as a lawyer, to join the office of the ombudsman. But my dream is really to become a deputy ombudsman and not the ombudsman, because there's less stress, perhaps. Second, but because the IBP chapter of my hometown nominated me into this position, I honored it by accepting their nomination, and here I am. Second, ma'am, I come from Cebu, and I go home to Cebu. And if appointed, I think this will be my last position, because I would like to retire and enjoy my life in my beautiful province.
I understand there is a follow-up question, PJ Ekong.
Sige po.
If you are appointed as ombudsman, would you still pursue government service upon expiration of your term? Because by then,
Yes po.
you haven't reached yet your compulsory retirement in the judiciary.
I will retire po and enjoy my life in Cebu.
Thank you. For my next question, PJ, the functions of the Ombudsman and the Sandigan Bayan are closely interrelated, particularly in the prosecution and adjudication of graft and corruption cases. As an applicant for Ombudsman, are you aware of the total number of cases currently filed by the office before the Sandigan Bayan?
Yes po, I am aware of the number of cases filed as of this year.
May we know the number?
Okay. The new filing of the Office of the Ombudsman for this year is only 99, and 96 are information, and 3 of the cases are special civil actions. There are around 30 cases, more or less 30 plus cases, that are appealed from the lower courts.
At the average, PJ, what is the percentage of the acquittal on one hand and dismissal on the other hand?
The acquittal and dismissal or conviction,
Conviction.
for that matter, they would depend actually year on year. We will always see a more or less around the 50% of conviction and acquittal,
50% acquittal and 50%
more or less.
conviction.
It's 40, 60, or 50 plus po.
Earlier, I heard, PJ, your discussion about the inordinate delay.
Yes po.
What percentage of the acquittal is due to inordinate delay?
Prior to, in 2017 to 2019, more than several of the cases were dismissed by reason of inordinate delay until the Supreme Court came up with that ruling in the case of Kagang, where the Supreme Court, through Justice Senior Associate Justice Leonen, came up with a ruling on how to distinguish cases that should be dismissed by reason of inordinate delay. Further, this ruling of Kagang was refined further in the case of People versus the First Division of Sandigan Bayan. And this time, it was very clear when the Supreme Court said, we have to set aside the fact-finding and not consider the number of years when the case is pending for fact-finding to determine inordinate delay. So slowly, when the Supreme Court has set the guidelines in Kagang and in the First Division case, the number of cases that were dismissed by reason of inordinate delay dropped.
Thank you. For my third question, in recent years, the legal community has been divided over the Department of Justice's issuances on preliminary investigations, particularly the adoption of the reasonable certainty of conviction standard as the basis for filing of cases in court. if appointed as ombudsman, PJ, would you adopt a similar policy to ensure that only cases with sufficient evidence likely to result in conviction are filed?
I differ to disagree. I would prefer to maintain the basis for the filing as prima facie or reasonable, that there is a ground, probable cause for the filing of the cases. We have to remember that in the case of graft and corruption, we should always be protecting the resources of government, and that we should always be sure that government officials are accountable. And in the case of preparation of the cases pending before the ombudsman, there might yet be pieces of evidence or documents that are not yet available. So that it is important that we just use as a standard probable cause. Anyway, when the case is pending before the Sandigan Bayan, we do not change the standard for conviction.
Thank you. And for my last question, PJ, you have expressed views regarding the public disclosure of statements of assets, liabilities, and net worth. Do you believe that there are valid grounds to restrict access to these documents, given that they are being weaponized as well by political rivals?
Your Honor, let me couch my answer in relation to the case of Baraugo versus the Ombudsman, where the Supreme Court laid down the rules that the public's access to the SALN that is filed by a public official is not unbridled. It should be, there should be some limitation to the access to the SALN. As a matter of fact, the Supreme Court said that access to information about the SALN of the judges and the justices is also limited by the Supreme Court. And along that view, the Supreme Court believed that the Ombudsman should be able to set guidelines to prevent indiscriminate access to SALN. I believe that while there is that power to determine whether SALN should be accessible to the public, we should not curtail it that much. So the Ombudsman should be able to distinguish and try to balance the interest between information to be given to the public, and that's the right of the public to know, and at the same time respect the privacy of the public official.
PJ, you mentioned about limitation.
Yes.
You mentioned about proper balance.
Yes po.
If given the chance po to become the next ombudsman, can you give us an idea what limitation and proper balance would you be introducing in as far as access to SALN is concerned?
Well, I believe that if indeed the reason for access to the SALN is good faith and not to be used as a weapon to attack the public official, then access should be given. We can always make the person who applied also be accountable by letting them write a letter, and this letter should be a sworn statement stating the purpose po.
I see. So the test is good faith.
Yes po.
Thank you very much, PJ Ekong, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you po, Your Honor.
Thank you, Congresswoman Luistro. Our next interviewer is the Honorable Attorney Nasauro H. Firme.
Thank you, Attorney Marife. Good afternoon, PJ.
Good afternoon po, Your Honor.
So you've been interviewed for a number of hours. Earlier you were greeted good morning, now it's good afternoon. Okay. How are you, PJ? How's Sandigan Bayan?
We're okay po.
Okay, that's nice. Okay. Well, I have two sets of question. One comes from the senator. But it's a general question that we ask to all applicants. So this only question is about the lifestyle check. And I'm sure you have heard news or watched news recently regarding the lifestyle check among all government officials. So what would be your position on that?
Okay, insofar as the power of the ombudsman to conduct lifestyle check, let me couch it this way. The power to conduct lifestyle check by the ombudsman is not very clearly delineated by law. And if that is what we want the ombudsman to do, then I would think that the senator and the congressman would also empower the ombudsman accordingly. If you look at RA 6770, there is a power of the ombudsman to investigate. And probably that is what we can now just say that this is the lifestyle check. But this power to investigate of the ombudsman is limited in scope. It has in Administrative Order Number 1, series of 2025, where the ombudsman delineated the administrative, the procedure for the conduct of administrative and criminal procedure in the office, and it has provided for motu proprio investigations. But again, this is just a declaration of the ombudsman himself. We have to find basis in the Constitution and in the law for the said office to conduct the lifestyle check. There are certain jurisdictions that allow the investigative bodies to conduct lifestyle check, and I think that is where the office of the ombudsman copied that power, specifically in Hong Kong. That was how the ombudsman in Hong Kong was able to curb corruption in their state. But then again, that was copied by Ombudsman Marcelo. But I'm not really sure if it will hold water.
So I'll be asking my own set of questions, PJ. So number 1, if appointed as the ombudsman, what can the stakeholders expect from you?
The same dedication to serve the people with all honesty as I have been serving in the judiciary is what all the court users, stakeholders should expect from me. I have tried to live a simple life as I could, and I have not changed, even if I was appointed as Associate Justice and as Presiding Justice of the Sandigan Bayan.
Justice, you entered the judiciary or the government service way back in 2002,
Yes.
2002. You were appointed by the president, obviously, to become an MTC judge. Appointed again by the president in 2004 to become an RTC judge.
Yes po.
And appointed to become an associate justice by the president in 2016, 2016, and appointed by another president just this year to become DPJ. So question, obviously you have political backing, so to speak. So my question would now be about your being a political person. How apolitical are you?
I have not held any public office other than being a judge and an employee of the judiciary in my life. None of my family members are political, and we have no political affiliation at all.
Okay, next question, PJ. I understand that, we all understand that independence is one of the qualities, good qualities of an ombudsman, of the ombudsman. So can you tell us some instances, or probably just one instance, wherein you displayed your independence?
In the way I decide cases po, I have always maintained my judicial independence. Even if my colleagues will vote in the way that they want because of what they think, so I will always vote in accordance with my conscience and in what I believe in.
Another quality of a good ombudsman is obviously integrity. So, can you tell us an instance wherein or when your integrity was put to test? And how did you navigate through that?
There is this case that I have been always asked why I ruled that way and why I made that decision. And for me, I held on to what I believed, and I was not swayed by people who even helped me in my appointment. And I am proud to say that I was able to hold my position in the case that I am talking about.
So, if ever appointed, PJ, to become the next ombudsman, do you see any or foresee any significant change in your life or lifestyle? No. How about bodyguards?
My
You will now
life
be
has not
surrounded by
changed po.
bodyguards.
Actually, justices are allowed to have security detail, but I have given my security detail to a junior of our court, and until now, I have no security detail po. I believe I am a better shot, and I could guard myself better than any security guard. I maintain the practicing po, firing,
Yeah.
to guard myself.
Yes. How much do you value, PJ, public perception?
I have grown in the judiciary, and I believe that public perception is very important to a judge and to anybody, like including the ombudsman, because at the end of the day, people will believe in your decision because they perceive you to do what is right. Even if you do what is right, and people do not believe that you have the capacity to do the right thing or to decide in the right manner, there is no sense in doing that. So I believe that we should maintain the perception to be good and that we are honest in our actions.
Well, also, regrettably, even if we do something good, there will be criticisms against us.
Yes.
And that brings me to my next question. How would you take public criticisms, PJ?
I have understood that sometimes keeping quiet is the best way to deal with things when they are really heated up, and probably speak when it's quiet and when minds are cooler.
So it's better to talk inside the library because it's quiet there. Just kidding. I have 5 things here, PJ. No? And I want you to rank them. No? One being the most significant, no, for you. The fifth one will be the least significant. So these are the 5 items I have in my mind. No? Number 1, no, let us also assume that it's already 2029. And by then, no, there's a new president. In other words, tumawid ka na, no, to the next administration.
Opo.
So these are the 5 things. Number 1, the president that appointed you to the post,
Okay.
the present president. No? Number 2, the president, no, by 2029. So it's the new admin.
The seating.
Number 3, which is, I heard earlier, very important to you, the public, including their perception.
Yes.
Number 4, the safety of your family. And number 5, your personal goal. So which is most significant and which is least significant?
Again, the most significant to me would be public perception. And the least important to me would be the president who is sitting.
Next question. If evidence warrants, PJ, would you have the guts, courage, and nerve to file the case, administrative and criminal, against those who help you get this ombudsman post?
Yes, Your Honor. I will have that courage to do so. I have not backed out in any of the cases that were pending before me. I have not inhibited in any of the cases before me because I believe that I can stand by my principles.
Last question, PJ. If ever appointed, what significant development in your life would make you decide to leave the ombudsman post? In other words, you have to serve 7 years, so you cut it short. Is there anything you in mind that I would quit before the end of my term?
My health, probably. If I will get sick and I could no longer move and I could no longer serve, I think it would be time to step down. Because I do not want any office to be held in and be compromised because I want to stay on when I can no longer function.
That will be all, PJ. Good luck.
Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Firme. Our last interviewer is the Honorable Justice Jose Catral Mendoza.
Thank you very much, Tony Marife. Good morning, good afternoon, PJ.
Good afternoon po.
I have interviewed you in the past about 5 times, I think. So,
Many times po.
Oh. And today I'm adapting the questions of my colleagues. They have covered what I wanted to ask you. So I have no further questions. You are excused.
Thank you po.
very much.
Thank you. Sorry for standing up, Justice.
Thank you, Justice Mendoza, and thank you,